Hi, and welcome to the show. Today will be a little different. Today, I'm going to talk straight to the camera, straight to you, about my candidacy for the state legislature. I wanted to take time just to be able to relate to why I'm running, how I feel about certain issues, and to contrast myself with my opponent. The kind of the overarching theme that I have for my campaign is, perhaps you've seen from my lawn signs, is justice, and there's that umbrella on the signs. I took the inspiration from the thought that when laws are made that are by the people, of the people, and for the people, that they will be an umbrella, a shield to the vulnerable from powerful special interests. So when you see that sign, you see a lot of people grabbing the stem of that umbrella. That is my intent to communicate there. The other thing why the word justice rang with me was that when there's a need for charity, it's to solve a present need. Something is right coming up, needs attention, we have to deal with this. When I think of justice and justice work, it's the work of going upstream to find out the source of the problem. What is creating that need? And so some of the issues that are important to me that I'll be talking about today are about going upstream to find justice and to address those needs. And then later on in the show, I will be talking point by point about how I would differ with the incumbent on how he voted in the legislature, and some of the points of view that I have that would differ from his. Just people ask me, well, Ken, how are you going to differentiate yourself from the other guy? And so that's what I'm here to do today. I'd like to start, I was in an interview, and the interviewer asked me, I had listed maybe 4 or 5 of my concerns. He said, well, what's number one? What's the most important one? And I had to think for a minute, and I thought in this terms of going upstream that it is education. Because, and what I would like to bring to the table, and talking to Dr. Mary Alice Russell, our school superintendent, her concerns are largely around how kids come into school, whether they're prepared or not, because it really determines how successfully they will leave. And so she has been focusing on pre-kindergarten, and to have those kids come in at 3 or 4 and be able to be prepared to learn and to be in an environment where other people are learning is essential. And she talks to me about the large number of children that come into school that are not ready, and they're disruptive to themselves, just behaviors that prevent a classroom from being successful. So pre-kindergarten is a way to go upstream, and that is under that broad title of education. Oh, I do have some good news about education in Oregon. We hear, there's a lot of concern about graduation rates. However, from my research, Oregon is now number 14th in the country for the growth of the graduation rate. So there's some good news. We're working on it, and there are results. The other thing that Mary Alice communicated to me that she is concerned about, and this again is going upstream, and going upstream in kind of the style of a family place, right to the parents that need help, that need community, that need support. And so she suggested parenting classes. And I didn't get a chance to get into detail on what she meant by that, about how it would work, but that's a concern of hers, and she would like to be able to have an influence in the community around that. Here's another concern that Dr. Russell has, and that is around teacher salaries. Now, what? You think, why is he talking about that suddenly? Well, you might be aware that in Washington State, there was a teacher strike, and the teachers were successful in getting much higher salaries. And I have a friend of mine's daughter just started teaching down in Coos Bay, and I actually have heard through my friend that young teacher has caught Washington salaries have caught her attention. The difference is significant, more than many thousands of dollars, over $10,000 difference in teachers' salaries. So Mary Alice Russell is concerned that there will be a shortage of teachers, that there will be a significant impact to Oregon. Well, those are the concerns I have around education, because like I said, what is the most important? It's going upstream. It's getting people prepared to be successful in life, and even back to the parents and how they bring a child forth into school. So that's my number one. I have a concern. If I was in the legislature, this is a big concern that I would take with me, and that is that around the country, the most common average, by far, a number of school days, more than 40 states have 180 days of school. That's just what they're mandated to do. In Oregon, we have a mandate of 165 days. Now, some school districts are able to have more days because of their creative with their, with their budgets, but many do not, and that is the minimum, and many just meet that minimum. Well, if you take that difference of 180 days and 165 days, that's 15 days. Well, that's 3 school weeks a year difference. And if you multiply that times 12, the number of school years, 1 through 12, that's 36. 36 weeks. You know what 36 weeks is? It's a school year. So our kids, with that reduced number of days, come out with 1 school year less of instruction. Now, we do very well here, and our administrators and our teachers do very well with the time that they have. However, more time to get that information, get that learning, get that what these students need to be successful to them, I think is a significant concern. Well, there's a lot more to say about education, but I'll leave it at that. The next thing that you'll find on my flyers that are coming out, I'm mailing a few thousand of them, you'll see that I also have health care. Now, health care is another case of going upstream, especially for children. When children are raised in a way that their health issues are addressed, they become healthier adults. And what we've seen here in Oregon is a lot of working around the edges and a lot of concern about, well, how are we going to cover these people? And now the federal contribution is lessening, and that's going to mean that we need to support the health care budget here in Oregon even more. Well, I just have taken to heart the cut through all of that, these current problems that we're in, and that is taking to the table for negotiation the change to health care for all Oregonians. If you take, where's the money going to come from? Oh my gosh, how's that going to work? The money that you and I and companies pay into the healthcare system is sufficient to cover all of us in an efficient manner. So if you go to the Healthcare for All Oregon website, the questions that come to mind are answered there, and I encourage you to do that. Now, this is a conversation that's getting more and more onto the table, and I intend to be one of those people that pushes it toward the center and pushes that forward. A lot of people ask when I knock on doors, what are you going to do about the homeless? What are you going to do about housing? Knock on an apartment door, they'll tell me my rent has gone up hundreds of dollars in the last few months. It's brutal. It's unbelievable what that would do to a budget. Rent's going up 25%. What are you going to do about it? Difficult problems. If it was easy, it would have been solved. However, let's talk about homelessness. We have good systems here in our district for supportive transitional housing, but they're not sufficient. Supportable transitional housing, that's where you meet the person that's living without a home where they are. You say, hey, we've got this roof, we've got this food, we have this program. You want to try it? Come on in. we're going to figure out how to support you. As you can tell, that's not something we can do, that we haven't done for the people that have that need, because it's not sufficient. But our county has done miracles. There are several supportive transitional housing projects here, but the counties and the states, the cities and the counties, if you talk to their officials, they say, boy, we need help with this. And the state needs to come in a way that organizes us and supports us in a way that we can be more comprehensive in offering supportive transitional housing. Well, how are you going to pay for that? I'll get to that one later when I talk about tax reform. So let's just put a pin in that one, and we'll get back to tax reform. Housing, the way I see going forward there, it's a complicated problem. It's expensive. It's slow to build new housing. If there was a public-private partnership between the builders and the state, that would say, they'd have a conversation like this. Okay, builders, we see that you're doing your best to build affordable housing, but by the time you buy the land, pay the system development fees, SDCs, and build with high price of materials, what it comes out is the rents are going to be beyond what we would say affordable to someone making at the minimum 200% of the poverty level. That's the kind of housing we need. People that are getting started, people that have minimum wage jobs that hopefully are working toward better employment, but in this climate, that's very difficult. So if the builders can be given that assistance that they need to be able to build something that turns out where the rents that they can charge, that are available, that make it available to those people that need more affordable housing, that they can still make it pencil out, then let's get in that negotiation. Let's make those calculations and see what it would take to build more of that type of housing. Now, the fourth thing that I talk about, and you really only get 3 issues when you're going out to campaign, because people that's just pick your top 3 and stick with them, but I add on a 4th because this is what got me off my political couch, so to speak, when I first started thinking about what motivates me, what concerns me, what do I see as going upstream, and what do I find up there, and here's what I found. I found that the percentage of the general fund in past decades that has been paid by corporate taxes was around 18%. And now over the years, that has shrunk. Last year, or 2015, it was 6%. And in 2017, it was 5.5%. And it is scheduled to continue going down. Well, what's going on there? Well, unfortunately, when there are special interests that make a goal of electing those legislators that will be sympathetic to their special interest in how much they pay in taxes, they are successful. And so that results in tax loopholes that have been choking the revenue of Oregon. Now, before I start talking too much about evil corporations, and that we don't want to chase them out of the state, that's not what I'm saying. Because business in Oregon is good. Often, the top states, their GDP, Oregon is often in the top 10 states of gross domestic product growth. And we continue to be in the top 10 over a long period of time. So business is good, and yet revenues from our corporations are shrinking. The corporations that use the freeways for transportation, that benefit from the schools from their employees, and benefit from the protection of our safety, police, sheriff, and highway patrol. So that's a concern of mine. So what am I talking about? What is 5.5%? It's less than $600 million. What about the lottery? That's a good source of income. The lottery takes in more than all the revenue from corporate taxes for the entire state. That's the Walmart, the Comcast, the Verizon. People that are hoping for a break by buying lottery tickets are contributing more to the state budget than all of our corporations. There's some room for tax reform. Tax reform was tried and was not successful in the last session and in 2017, and it will be the topic coming up again in 2019. I hope to be there to do something about it. And I want to talk to measures 103 and 104. This is a tax loophole, and then it's locking in the tax loophole. The loophole being not about taxes on groceries, but the corporate minimum tax is really the issue. That's the wolf that's in the sheep's clothing, locking in corporate minimum taxes so that this, I'll call it a good deal that business are getting on paying taxes, will be locked in for just the grocery industry. The problem of putting a sales tax on groceries is minuscule. That's not what that issue is about. It's about locking in the corporate minimum tax and the taxes that they pay other than sales tax. So, and then Measure 104 will cause if you want to close tax loopholes, which we have hundreds of in our tax code now, if you want to close those because they've been determined to be inefficient, not doing the job that they were intended to do, and basically unfair, you will need a supermajority to do that. That means it creates what I call a superminority. The superminority of perhaps 13 senators could stop the closing of tax loopholes if Measure 104 passes. So again, if you want to know about where I'm coming from around taxes, no on 103 and 104. One more thing that I talk to some friends, say, what should I talk about on my show? And they say, well, you've got to talk about climate change, you've got to talk about labor, you've got to talk about PERS. I'm not sure I'm going to have a time to do all that. I just will touch on climate change. And I look at the admission of carbon into the atmosphere as like putting the trash out on the curb. Well, we do that responsibly. We pay, and it's taken away and dealt with as best as we can figure out how to do. Oftentimes, rivers will be polluted because a company didn't have to pay for taking out that trash. They could just pipe it into a river until our rivers were catching on fire and so polluted that we had to do something about it. But now we have another stream of waste that is not being monitored and not being acknowledged as to its damage to the environment. And what that's called is companies like to make those costs externalize costs, and they can externalize the cost of carbon by pumping it into the air. Well, we can't companies can't externalize the cost of their trash. They have to deal with that responsibly. They can't pump chemicals into the river. The next step is now pumping carbon into the air. It has to be dealt with in a way that makes you and me and the companies that use our resources in such a way that creates carbon, that it's acknowledged, and that acknowledgement is built into the cost of what we're doing. And that will make us more responsible to bring it down. Well, I'm going to have to skip a few things. Time's going much faster than I thought. All right, how would I differ from my opponent? One of the things that got me to decide to run was how my opponent voted on gun safety. There was a bill called the boyfriend loophole. It's quite a name, isn't it? In the federal law says that if a spouse is convicted of abuse, then guns can be removed from that home, because a woman has 5 times more chance of being killed if there are guns present in a domestic violence situation. So it's a women's safety situation. But what federal law does not rule on is if there's a domestic partnership, people are cohabiting, they're living together, and one is convicted of abuse. the courts had no ability to remove firearms from that situation. So hence it's called the boyfriend loophole. If they weren't married, then that safety step could not be made. So it's up to states to close the boyfriend loophole. So that loophole was closed with House Bill 4145, and it passed with a supermajority, more than 3/5, and my opponent voted against closing the boyfriend loophole. I was surprised. And there was another bill around gun safety, House Bill 719. And when a court finds that a person is in an imminent risk of danger to themselves or others, guns can be removed from that person's possession until that crisis has passed. So it's addressing suicide. Now, this one touched me because I did have a cousin that shot himself. And his mother knew that he was suicidal, and she knew that he had a gun. This was a long time ago in another state, but I like to think that because this law passed, that other people won't have to suffer with the loss of a loved one. And that was, like I said, H. Bill 719, and my opponent voted against that. That was a close one. That was 31-28. So gun safety measures, I would like to be a representative to further the safety of women and all of us with gun safety measures. Another one that I noticed that coming out of the latest legislature was House Bill 1141. It was a driver's license extension for DACA recipients whose protections had expired. So the federal government said, no, we're not renewing that. You're just going to hang in limbo till we figure it out. And so that's where we are. Well, without the DACA protection in place, it wasn't part of our law that a DACA recipient could receive an extension on their driver's license. But this bill took care of that. And again, that was a supermajority that passed, but my opponent voted against that. Again, on immigration, there was HB 3464, which is very similar, not very similar, it has similar purpose to the anti-profiling law that's been challenged with Measure 105. Now, my opponent is against Measure 105, but this 3464 extended the anti-profiling laws to state agencies not having to give to immigration officials the personal data of people that were in their system. So, for example, if an ICE agent came to school and saw a young boy and then wanted to ask the school who are his parents and where do they live, well, that was been blocked by HB 3464. And again, my opponent voted against that. Well, that's enough on that one. I have to skip a few and move forward. I wanted to move to criminal justice. Do you remember the bill? Well, of course, you don't remember Senate Bill 505, but you remember perhaps that there was a discussion around should grand jury transcripts be released, especially in cases when police officers are being charged, so that the families of perhaps the deceased will know what was presented to the grand jury to see if it was to increase accountability for how the DA moved with the grand jury against in the case of a police officer shooting. So that passed, but my opponent voted against having that transparency. Healthcare, Senate Bill 558. Cover all kids. 17,000 kids were covered with this bill. It keeps them out of the emergency rooms where it costs even more, costs you, me, the state, even more money. So fortunately that passed. Again, it was called Cover All Kids, 17,000 children in Oregon. My opponent voted against that. There was HB 3391, the reproductive health equity, and I think that's pretty descriptive. My opponent voted against that. There was perhaps you remember the 1.5 tax on providers that preserved Oregon health care coverage for 350,000 Oregonians. That passed 36-23. That was, again, a supermajority. My opponent voted against that, but some of the people that voted against it in the legislature said, we're going to take this one to the people, and that was Measure 101. And then that seemed to be quite a waste of money to take that one to the people, because it was passed overwhelmingly 2-1 that this 1.5% tax on insurance providers was a good thing to do. Education, the subject of class size, we talk about this all the time. What are we going to do about that? Well, in this case, the bill was to allow collective bargaining to bring up the subject of class size. And I'm thinking, well, if somebody's going to do something about it, maybe the teachers can have that be something they push in their collective bargaining. That could be a path forward in reducing class size. That passed, but again, my opponent voted against that. There were 4 transparency bills passed. You know, maybe you've heard about the problem when you go to public information from the state archives, that there were a lot of exemptions, that companies and interests had been able to shield themselves from public records requests. And there were other techniques to charge a lot of money and delay, and these 4 bills were to address that. And there were 4 bills, and my opponent voted against 2 of them. One of them was created a public records advocate and public records advisory council. That one passed 49-11. So in the interest of transparency, I'm very glad that passed despite my opponent's no vote. Now I said let's stick a pin in tax reform. How are you going to pay for it? What was that one? Was on transitional housing. If the state got involved in coordinating and promoting transitional housing, what are you going to do about that? Well, when you have a mortgage on your home, you have interest, and you get a deduction for that, the mortgage interest deduction. If you have a second home, you get the same deduction. Well, if someone has a second home, maybe that deduction would be better used to house people that don't have homes. So that is the first place that I would go to look to for tax reform. Another place that it's it's reversed. It's not going to get us more revenue, but it would be part of a tax reform package if I was elected. And it's that we basically in Oregon have a flat tax. So you people that were watching that think a flat tax is a good idea, well, then you think, well, Oregon has a good rate, because it's the same 9% from people that make $16,900 all the way up to the people that make $250,000. They pay the same rate. And that's called a regressive tax. When people that are making $16,900, I think you could classify them as low income. When the low-income people are paying the same tax rate as the high-income people, there's something wrong there. So we've shifted a lot of the burden, the tax burden, from our corporations to people that are struggling, and that definitely needs reform. Well, I'm just about out of time. I have a whole page on PERS. Maybe I'll get a guest and we'll dive into that one. But thank you for watching, and I sure would appreciate your vote. Again, I'm running for House District 24 in the state legislature. Thanks for watching. See you later.